I'm Megan Skidmore, and welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts on a faith journey and all aspects of life. Join me as I bring this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I firmly believe we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with asking questions and allowing doubts. When we are more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. First Friday's free coaching, a confidential group to bring all the questions, vent frustrations, share fears, express doubts. Navigating a new and uncertain reality is hard enough. Let's remove the worry of judgment from others. In this group, I will help you help yourself so that you can be there for your child, family, loved ones, and for you too. Click the link in the show notes to sign up. You must complete the agreement. Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm Megan Skidmore, your host, and I am welcoming Blair Hodges on the podcast today. I am so thrilled for this conversation. Welcome, Blair.
It's good to be here.
I often connect with podcast guests on social media, a lot of virtual friendships, virtual connections. And so when I found your Instagram account called Family Proclamations, Famprocs, your take, your direction, your content really resonated with me. And I knew we just had to have a conversation. So thank you for coming on.
Sometimes the algorithm gets it right, I guess.
Sometimes it does. And sometimes it annoys the heck out of me.
Yeah.
So to start off, Blair, I would like you to take a minute and introduce yourself to our listeners. Just share all about you as much as you would like to, your background, your family, faith of origin. I never like to assume. This podcast does have a reach of those of the LDS faith and beyond. You know, just because mine is of the LDS faith background doesn't mean that all the listeners are. And I really try to be inclusive in that way.
Sure. All right. So, my name is Blair. I grew up in Utah. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I consider myself a Mormon. I know that word has been outlawed by a lot of church members, but I still consider myself to be a Mormon. I was raised here in Utah. My family of origin is Mormon as well. Not everybody in the family has stayed in the church. I served a mission for the church in Wisconsin. I worked for the church for about almost a decade at BYU. I worked at a place called the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship, which is still there and still doing good work. I did a podcast with them during the time I was there. So I think, and a lot of those episodes are still up. So if people want to find out kind of past stuff I've worked on, interviewing people about different religions, including Mormonism, that's still up there. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and I should also say, like, I'm married, got some kids, have a little dog, live in Salt Lake City, and I love to read and podcast. And my day job is in the nonprofit sector. So lots of different things going on for me.
Awesome. I didn't realize you were in the nonprofit sector now, but I did see when I was just doing a little bit of, kind of research on your background, I did see that you hosted that podcast at the Neil A. Maxwell Center. Very cool.
Yeah.
I've listened to some of those episodes myself. So as you know, if you have listened to one or more of my episodes, that I am all about normalizing faith journeys, that there's no two that are alike. And it's supposed to be that way, that we don't have to feel our journey needs to look like the person next to us or another member of our family or by a certain list or checking off boxes. And that's actually what makes them so beautiful. And to me is the manifestation of our connection with the divine. That's what I believe. And so I would love to start with you sharing, and your Instagram account may actually be an element of this, but I would love for you to share some about your faith journey with us. I know for me, it's often a significant life event that introduces an opportunity to you experience a shift Sometimes we resist it. Sometimes we're in denial about it. Sometimes we're kind of shoved into it. For me, I've said this before in other episodes, I experienced a pivot. I call it a pivot in my faith journey when when I learned my kiddo identified as LGBTQ+, and this has been 5+ years ago now. But yeah, I would love for you to share when you have experienced something like that. I don't think there's ever a single moment, right? There's often multiple, but maybe one or two experiences that stand out that really have shaped your faith journey and where you're at today. And share as much or as little as you feel comfortable.
Sure. So, like I said, I was raised in the church. I grew up in Layton here in Utah, kind of a little suburb, and it was a pretty typical ward. There wasn't a lot of Mormon royalty or things like that. So, my family certainly doesn't come from any Mormon royalty. We're just kind of a
Really
regular,
quick,
yeah.
for those that are not of the LDS faith background, can you share what you mean by, I know what you mean by Mormon royalty.
Sure. So some people have a really emotional, strong ties to their faith because their family has been in the church for a long time. So they might trace their ancestors back to the days when the church was founded or to pioneers that came across the plains to Utah to find a religious freedom and set up a new kind of place where the church could flourish. And so Mormon royalty would be connected to those pioneer ancestors or to current church leadership. The church is led by a quorum of the 12 apostles, a quorum of the 70, comprised all of men who hold ecclesiastical authority. So some people put a lot of stock into that, and a lot of their identities tied up into that. So when people experience faith, when people experience doubt, it can be a lot more personal or can be tied up even more in their sense of self and their history. For me, my Mormonism was very much located in my family and my ward, singing the songs we grew up singing in primary school. I'm a child of God, and He has sent me here, given me an earthly home with parents kind and dear. That was very much my Mormonism. Really traditional looking family, a stay-at-home mom, a father who provided, a mother who nurtured, very by the book. And I think my personal testimony solidified more when I took seminary in like ninth grade, started to think more about taking ownership over my own faith. I had a really inspirational seminary teacher. We were studying the New Testament that year. I feel like I got a lot closer to Christ at that time on a personal level. So it became more than just a worldview, but I feel like that was more of a conversion process for me. If this really is meaningful to me and I want to take greater ownership over my faith. So my dad, when I was 15, was diagnosed with brain cancer. And that really was a trial of faith because, there's a possibility of praying and helping him survive, or, the idea that our faith could save him. And that it didn't work out that way. He died about a year after he was diagnosed. And that really raised a lot of questions for me about what prayer was like, what prayer was for, what faith could do, and my ideas about God being really intimately involved in my life and kind of helping pull the strings evaporated at that point. I feel like looking back on it, I can see it was safer for me to say, I don't think God killed my dad. And there were some people that would say, well, God needed your dad. Heavenly Father needed him and called him home or whatever. And that was really painful to hear. And I just didn't believe it. But there's a lot of church members that would say things like that. So I think that was the first kind of differentiation that I started to feel with a lot of the people around me at church is, I actually think differently on the whole how God is involved thing than a lot of these people do. But I was still really firm in the faith. I, like I said, decided to serve a mission, got really interested in all the questions that could come up and having answers to all those. So I loved reading the scriptures. I loved finding quotes from general authorities of the church, modern day prophets and apostles who could speak with authority and answer questions about what we need to do to be moral or what God expects of us or what happens to us when we die. And I loved having an answer to everything. But I also fell in love with learning about other faiths at the time. And it began as a way to present our own faith. As a missionary, we want to give people what they don't have, right? We want to say, oh, I respect your belief in God. Here's some things we believe about God, and maybe these are better things to believe about God. What do you think? But as I learned about other faiths more, I don't know, it really lit a fire in me. And I tried to attend as many different churches as I could. And I read the Quran and I read other world scripture and got really interested in comparative religion. And my questions shifted away from why is Mormonism better to what do these faiths have to offer? And so after my mission, came home, kind of did the regular thing that a lot of Mormons do, which is you keep attending church, try to find a wife. I did all that successfully, but my questions and interest in religion just kept expanding. And I found myself studying religion as a graduate student. I wanted to get a degree in religious studies. And so that's the path I pursued. And I think at that time, I felt like that kind of education could really help me understand my faith better and also help me contribute to the church as well. And so getting a job for the church really meant a lot to me, that I could bring my talents or the gifts that I had been given and kind of consecrate those to the church. Obviously, throughout that process, you're going to run into a lot of questions and you're going to run into a lot of doubts and it's just, yeah. So through that whole process, my own faith just continued to evolve and change and until I'm at where I'm at today.
Awesome. That is amazing that you got a graduate degree in religious studies, I think is what you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I
That
got
sounds
my master's degree at
wonderful.
Georgetown. I did my thesis on intellectual disabilities in Mormon thought and history. So I have ADHD, kind of neurodivergent, and I was always
Mm.
interested in how that intersected with like feeling the spirit, having the Holy Ghost. Like, what does personal revelation look like if your brain kind of works differently? Or I could see how psychiatric medication could affect how it was, what it was like to feel the spirit or to feel inspired by God. And so I had a lot of questions about that and studied what church leaders taught about what it means to be intellectually disabled, especially in the 19th century. And yeah, and I felt like, hey, if we can, I felt it was similar to studies about the church's beliefs about Black people or about queer people, that we have these stories that we locked onto early on in Mormonism, and those stories persist. But maybe if we turn the tape back, we could have gone a different way or we could have understood things a little bit differently. So I did that with intellectual disabilities to say maybe the ways that we think about what it means to be disabled could be better than what they are. Um, yeah, and that was really fun. And when I finished that up, like I said, I got the job at BYU right after that and started working at the Maxwell Institute after that.
That sounds fantastic. So you said something in your in sharing about your background. You said several things. We'll see how
Yeah,
much
and
time
all of
we
my
have to
ramblings. Yeah.
no ramblings. It was fascinating. I would love to study, have a graduate degree in religious studies. The longer I found myself on this pivot in my faith journey, this faith expansion. But you mentioned something, I think it was right after you shared how your dad passed away from
Mhm.
brain cancer, which I'm very sorry to hear that. That had to
Yeah.
have been so challenging as a youth.
Yeah.
And then I think you said that was the first sense of differentiation you started to feel. What, if you can remember, what made you want or decide to differentiate?
I mean, when you're raised Mormon, you're really taught to listen to the spirit and to pay attention to your conscience and pay attention to how you feel. That truth isn't just propositional claims, but like it also can invoke feelings in you and you will feel affirmed in things. And so it was like the radar that Mormonism gave me started pointing me in different directions than what a lot of church members or the church itself was teaching. So when I would hear people say, you know, Heavenly Father needed your dad on the other side. And for Mormons, that means like he needed to do missionary work for people who had died without hearing the gospel and that he could go teach them about that and help them
Right.
find the truth in the afterlife. And, you know, they would tell me that. And I would just think to myself, like, my dad had 5 kids, ages like 7 to 18. And my mom didn't have a degree at that time and was widowed and had to figure out everything. And I just felt like it was a real problem if God was just like, oh, I'm just going to go grab this guy and this guy is going to come and be a missionary over here. It didn't feel right. I didn't feel that
Yeah.
confirmation that that kind of a thing was true. Now, the dissonance is that that feeling is supposed to affirm what I learned at church. So the fact that it wasn't doing that was sort of disorienting, but
Yeah.
I went with it because I'm like, oh, this is the way I've kind of been figuring out truth at church anyway. So I should
Yeah.
probably stick to it.
It was the tool you had at the time.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, and this is kind of an example of that, that you ran into a lot of doubts.
Hmm.
This was in specific reference to all the different religions of the world that you
Mhm.
have acquainted yourself with and studied, partly as, your graduate degree requirements, which sounds amazing. Can you talk or speak to this idea when you do run into doubts? Like, what is that process like for you when questions and doubts? One of my goals in starting this podcast is to shed light on this perspective we have of the word doubt, or at least the one that I grew up with, that I still think permeates our culture in some ways. I think it's changing, but doubt doesn't have to be cast with this negative connotation attached to it. Doubt is a good thing. It's natural. It's supposed to be a part of our human experience. And so if you could share with us when questions and doubts enter the scene for you at various points in your life, how do you navigate that? Do you initially reject or resist? How do you end up embracing or at least being willing to sit there and hold them in your hands and examine them? And what if you can just share that process with
Sure.
us?
I think I got two different messages about doubt growing up in Mormonism. And on the one hand, doubt was definitely criminalized. Like doubt was bad and we could get rid of it. We could banish it. We could actually know the truth of all things through a process of pondering about something, praying about it, and receiving answers to our prayers. And so if you had doubts, that might suggest that you weren't doing that properly. Maybe you weren't praying correctly. Maybe you had sinned or done something that made it so you couldn't pick up on the messages that God wanted to send you. And having doubts could call everything into question and threaten your relationship to your family. It could, it's, if I really like Melissa Inouye, who's a Mormon scholar who passed away, but she would talk about faith shouldn't be like a string of Christmas lights. And what she meant by that is like all the claims of the church kind of strung along on this Christmas light. And if you pull one bulb out, the whole string goes out. And she says faith shouldn't be that way. It needs to be much more ecological, much more web-like and complicated and interesting and exploratory. And I think I was definitely encouraged to have that Christmas light faith of like, okay, if the Book of Mormon's true,
Right.
then Joseph Smith is a prophet. And if he's a prophet, then God called him. And then if God called him, then the church itself is God's church and it's the true church. And if that's the case, I need to listen to the current church leaders and do what they're encouraging me to do because they're going to lead me back to God. This is the way to live my life. And if pull
Yeah.
pull a bulb out of that, the whole string goes out. Now I say so that's doubt on the one hand, which is like doubt's bad. On the other hand, I also received plenty of messages that doubt was really important. I should doubt what the quote world tells me about stuff. I should doubt that a family can be successful if there's a divorce.
Mhm.
I should doubt that queer people would be approved or loved of God as they are rather than as something that needs to be fixed or something sinful. So there was a lot of things I was supposed to doubt. So on the one hand, doubt was definitely discouraged. And on the other hand, it was highly encouraged. It just always depended on directing it in support of what the church was claiming or doing versus against what the church was claiming or doing.
That's a really interesting viewpoint. I haven't thought of it that way before, but yeah, you're right. It's kind of a false dichotomy. Doubt is good if you're using it as a tool in a prescribed way versus maybe your own way or a way that feels intuitively right or good for you.
Yeah. I mean, and to this day, like, so to your point about doubt being a positive thing, I agree. I think faith can be strengthened through doubt. I think doubt is a core component of what it means to have faith. I think the opposite of faith is certainty, all the things you've probably
Yes.
talked about with a lot of different guests. And I still think doubt can play a role in like, maybe I want to pursue something in my life that it would actually be unhealthy or hurt other people. And doubt can be
Yeah.
a message in my mind that says, why don't you hold on for a minute and like consider whether that's actually right? So I view doubt as a very neutral tool that can be used for really positive, enriching things or really destructive things that can shut us down. So yeah, I wish that those are the messages that I got at church more explicitly. Because again, the church did play multiple sides of doubt. It just didn't explore it in this exact way of seeing it as a neutral tool and ask, what are we doing with doubt? What good can doubt do? And what damage could doubt do?
So how do you personally, that's a very good point that you bring up. I love how you said doubt is neutral. How then do you, like, what's your personal process? How do you determine if it's a neutral thing for you in a given situation?
Well, I mean, I triangulate from the values that I believe and whether those values are manifest in the things that I
Mhm.
do or the things that I support. And I do that in tandem with people that I love and that I care about. And so you can do that at church. You can triangulate with church members and we all do that when we're participating in the church. That process can begin to damage us if we start going against values. For example, I have a value of God loves everyone.
Mhm.
And that means that God loves someone who's gay.
Mhm.
And someone would say, well, God does love someone who's gay, but he wants them to change. Well, if I have a doubt about that, I'm like, well, I don't know. I know this gay person at work. They're super cool. They have this partner that they really love. And I can tell their relationship is great. It has its ups and downs, but it looks like my relationship to my wife. And I could see
Mhm.
their relationship as that kind of refining school that I think a good relationship should be, where you help lift each other when you're down and help push each other to become better, and you don't expect perfection of each other. And like marriage is kind of this school of becoming better people and being loved and supported. And I'm like, that same thing can happen in a gay family, that can happen in a straight family. So why would the church put these walls up against that, or these
Yeah.
restrictions against that? So so then, we all kind of do this math about kind of how are my values actually playing out in the real world? Does my value map fit the actual territory I'm trying to walk across here? And when it doesn't, that's when we get cognitive dissonance and we get scared, and we might retreat away from that and just, okay, I'm just going to shut that down. I'm going to put it on the shelf, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to put that out of here, which is easier to do when I'm not the gay person, when I'm not the person wondering, like, can I
True.
ever have a loving relationship in this life? So,
Right. When it
yeah,
doesn't touch you, it's much easier
yeah,
to kind of separate oneself from it, both in a physical and an emotional, mental, and spiritual way.
yeah. And so for me, being a man in the church, a white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual man,
Hmm.
everything was sort of set up for me to already feel comfortable in most ways.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to run into the same kind of dissonance or difficulties that I think a lot of women do, or a lot of queer people do, or trans folks, or people that are wrestling with their faith that have to confront it more directly than I did. So I
Yeah.
just had a lot more time, I think, to figure out what I wanted to do with doubt and how I wanted to proceed. That was a
Right.
privilege and a luxury for me.
Yeah. I appreciate you actually mentioning that. I'm always curious, impressed, eager to, learn or hear the stories, particularly of those, like using your words. You are cisgender, heterosexual, white, male. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you have what we would call all privileges, and
Hmm.
yet you're willing to, I don't know if put it on the line or suspend it in order in the pursuit of your, I'll go out on a limb and say your inner peace, your uh, following your intuition, following questioning or at least being willing to put these doubts and questions on the table and looking at them and examining them and going through that process, because that's just not always the case in somebody who has the privilege that you have. And I just want to acknowledge that, and I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah,
all I
it's a
can
work.
say.
It's a work in progress too. Like the acknowledgement's
For
different than
sure,
like living it out. But
for
yeah,
sure. But yeah, I realize there's a lot at play going on here. I resonate with what you're sharing about your core values. And I know you used the word triangulate with your core values. I think this is somewhat similar. They've turned into a compass for me,
hmm,
which would insinuate like a four-pointed guiding mechanism. Tell me more about what you mean by triangulate.
yeah. I think we all kind of look around. We do this from the time we're little. I mean, I think about when my kids were toddlers, and like a loud bang would happen, and their first reaction would be to look at me or to look at my wife and be like, "What?" To see what we were doing. Like, okay, something unexpected and kind of scary happened. I'm gonna look, Mom and Dad, you guys okay? Okay, and then I might be able to,
Mhm.
okay, I think that might be okay. And I don't think that really leaves us. I think we're always taking the temperature of the room. I think,
Mm.
and within Mormonism, we do that through testimony bearing, right? The idea that we speak our truths, that we go up and say what we believe, and usually what we know. A lot of people talk about, I know this, I know the church is true, I know this and this. And so I think that triangulation is sort of, it's a humble way to check where we're at. It's a two-edged sword too, though, because Yeah, I mean, you can triangulate with some people that could take you far off the path of reasonable
Mm-hmm.
action or reasonable belief. So, but I think it's inescapable. I don't think anybody really can only live completely in their own heads without picking
Right.
up on cues and things from others. So when we're
Right.
triangulating, we're sort of checking in like, okay, here's kind of where I'm at. Where are you at? Okay. I can negotiate with
Right.
that. Or, oh, here, yeah, maybe I should change on that.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's this looking to external cues, whether that be from a person or a teacher,
Yeah.
a family
See,
member.
right. And with the church, it tries to set up a hierarchy for that. It tries to say, here are the things you should triangulate with. And then right now, the number one thing is the president of the church, the prophet, and then the apostles. Like that, you should always triangulate with that almost first and foremost. And if you're not in alignment with that, then you're the problem. You need to make an
Mm-hmm.
adjustment. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm triangulating with way more than that. I'm triangulating with the values that were instilled in me, again, as a primary child, singing those songs, I'll walk with you, I'll talk with you. That's how I'll show my
Mm-hmm.
love for you. And Jesus said, love everyone, treat them kindly too. Like I'm triangulating with that stuff. I'm triangulating with the stuff my parents taught me
Mm-hmm.
about. I'm triangulating with my wife and the kind of value system that she has. And I'm triangulating with feminists, with people who have thought more about discrimination and sexism and misogyny
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
trying to triangulate with them. So and then when I was doing a religious studies degree, I'm triangulating with other faith traditions and saying, yeah, are there common cores here? Are there differences? What are those? Where are they coming from? What resonates more with me? Are there things that I could actually learn from? Instead of seeing my faith as something that I needed to take to the world, to see it as something that I can bring with me into the world
Mm-hmm.
and that would be changed by that process and that I would expect it to change. That's a scary thing to do. I think
Yeah.
it can feel a lot more comfortable to not triangulate or to feel like I'm not triangulating or to have a simple triangulation process of like, okay, I know who the authorities are. I'm just going to follow
Mm-hmm.
that. I don't have to do a lot of thinking about this. I can outsource any of these doubts and any of these struggles by just making that decision to follow what they say.
Yeah.
That's an easy way to do it. And I've just never been the kind of person that could really do that. You
Yeah.
can
I
ask
hear you.
if my dad was still around, I'm sure he would tell you all about that.
I'm a very visual person. So as you're talking, I'm imagining myself. It's like you have expanded your triangle, your triangulation to include multiple triangles, and it's expanding, and it's almost turned into I don't know what multiple triangles makes without drawing it, but like an octagon or a decagon or
Yeah.
something. Like you have multiple points that you're kind of cross-checking yourself. You're kind of cross it's a healthy way of viewing your life goings on, your life experience around you. And I agree. The easier way is to just look at that top point. Okay, they say this. I'm okay. That's what I need to do.
Yeah. That's your
It
North
takes less
Star.
energy.
Yeah.
It takes less energy, less or no critical thinking. But the more triangular points that you add to your orbit, to your space, I think that's when I'm I'm going to shift a little bit, keep the same theme, but shift a little bit
Hmm.
and share a little personally here. I think that's why when policies that have recently been released in the LDS handbook, why those, well, I could list a lot of things. They are hurtful, they're painful, they're confusing. They, I don't, I genuinely don't feel or see the love in them. And I think that after hearing you has so much to do with where my points of my triangles are. I don't see queer individuals, and specifically this policy relates to transgender and non-binary individuals. And I have been open on this podcast and on others. I have a child who identifies as transgender, and I look at those policies, and those do not align at all with the experience, the personal, firsthand experience that I have had as a mother. And I have interviewed many people on this podcast who identify as transgender or non-binary or intersex or are the parents of kids who identify in this way. And that is just simply not who they are. The policies, I tend to see words like policy, rules, principles, doctrine, tenets, they kind of all just they kind of blend. I know there are different definitions for them, but kind of for the purposes of this specific topic, when something gets put in a handbook, and I had a recent conversation that is a published episode now where we talked more about it, and that was with Anita Irvin. She's also a parent of a transgender and a non-binary child. It perpetuates false stereotypes of these individuals, and that just adds fuel to the fire of fear that already exists. And so you're talking about this process of triangulation, and it's really, I'm hearing, taking your faith journey into your own hands. Yes, you can look to external cues. We're naturally going to do it. You said that yourself, but it's also one of those points. I think it's essential. This is me speaking. One of those points has to be you. It has to be your inner wisdom. It has to be your intuition. And if that ability or process isn't encouraged nor cultivated, I fear that someone would look at a policy like that and just go to that top point of their, simple basic triangle and say, well, this is what is said by our leaders, end of discussion. And I think there's a danger there. And I can say this because as a parent, I've seen firsthand, as a fellow friend of other parents with transgender and non-binary kiddos, those policies send a message that something is inherently wrong with you, and therefore the child is likely to believe or think, why would a God who created me this way love me? And why would I want to try to get to know or connect with or learn of and understand about this divine being? It's just, I love this concept of triangulation. It's really good.
And I think it's also really Mormon too. Like I said, how do we get at truth? We listen to testimony and then we feel a confirmation. We are supposed to study it out in our minds. So it's not just feeling, right? It's not just feeling. It's like we're supposed to take in the relevant information. So with transgender issues, for example, I used to believe that being trans was wrong, or some kind of maybe mental disorder or some kind of psychosis or some.
Well, that's how it was listed in the DSM-4 before it came out with the more current edition.
Exactly. And same with being gay, right? And I certainly believed that until I met a few trans folks and thought, okay, I don't feel good about thinking that they're just crazy people, and I haven't actually listened to them. So maybe I need to bracket those assumptions that I have and listen to what they have to say. And I listened to people's stories. And when I started listening to their stories, it started to sound reasonable to me. It started to be like, I think they're telling the truth. Maybe they're still misguided, or maybe there's still some kind of mental disorder or something, but they don't sound like that. So then I started looking into the science. I started looking into biology. I started learning more about sex differences and about gender and as being different from sex, and all of the great queer theory that's been developed and the scientific studies, and learning about intersex people, and started to think, okay, so their personal stories sound right to me. And the science is starting to line up with this. And I can see why it didn't before, because we've seen it with how people felt about gay people, or how people felt about people of color, and all the scientific quote unquote ideas about their inferiority, and how it was rooted in societal prejudice. And so I thought, I think I'm wrong about trans folks. I've got to repent of that. I'm converted. I underwent
my ways.
I underwent like a conversion in a classic Mormon way. And then the question comes up, the important question in Mormonism is, can I differ from the church? Can I have a different belief? Can I have a different opinion? And then if I do, what do I do about that? Do I mention it? Do I have to keep it to myself? Do I testify? Do I advocate? So there's a lot of decisions that come after the conversion. The other thing I want to point out is how you talked about policy. And we've seen this throughout history in Mormonism, where people want to make a distinction between a policy and a doctrine. A policy is some kind of rule or procedure, and a doctrine is some kind of teaching or belief. But I would suggest that people who think that softens the issues, like, Black people couldn't hold the priesthood, but that was just a policy.
Right.
First of all, that's not really true. We had plenty of doctrine about why they couldn't. But people say it was just a policy. And I would say, in the end, that's actually all that mattered, because the policy is how we actually treated people.
Yeah.
And, the New Testament says, why call you me Lord,
Right.
Lord, and do not what I say? Like you can say all the doctrine that you want, but how it actually affects people is really what
Exactly.
matters. So
Exactly.
to me, we get it backwards. If we say, oh, it's just a policy, I would say, oh gosh, that's the policy. That's actually what matters. So these new policies
Right.
that restrict transgender people from participating as they are, from using the bathroom they should use, from
Yeah. What
participating
class?
in young women's or young men's, or the fact that a non-binary kid, like, where are they going to go to begin with if we're making these divisions?
Right.
Or should a trans woman be able to attend Relief Society? Should a trans man be able to be ordained to the priesthood? The answer to all those questions is no. There's just no place for a trans member of the church other than just being there and accepting a second,
According to these policies.
according to these policies, accepting a second class citizenship in the kingdom. And so to me, policy is actually what matters. The doctrine's
Yeah.
interesting and informs the policy, but the policy is actually what we're doing.
And I think the reason why I said kind of at this point, they all blend together for me is I think you used different words, but it's essentially the same concept. The outcome is the same. Whether you're calling it a doctrine or a policy, there's still guidelines that are in writing of how to treat these
Mhm.
individuals. And going back to this concept of triangulation, if I am doing those cross checks, if I am looking to those points of my triangle or triangles, and one of those is what I know and what I've learned from personal experience about Christ and his ministry. Well, Christ was with the marginalized. That's
Mhm.
where he concentrated the time of his ministry, with those who were cast out, with those who were not accepted or seen or loved by general society. And in many ways, there are parallels to what's going on with this policy.
Yeah,
Individuals are getting cast out. I'm just going to call a spade a spade.
they are. I agree with you. And I think so. You're going to this story of Christ from the scriptures. You're triangulating from stories that
Yes,
we have in the New Testament. And in the church,
right.
people could say, well, the living prophet says this. So you
Mhm.
actually need to, again, we're setting up a hierarchy of who decides what the current truth is or what's important right now. And so it's actually runs against the grain in Mormonism to try to use the scriptures against a prophetic leadership. In fact, that would be highly discouraged, highly frowned on. And that's where people have to become comfortable with like being willing to do that. And the church itself certainly doesn't make a lot of space to do that. I think that's probably
Mhm.
one of the biggest problems in the contemporary church is not making space for people to have different perspectives. But it's a brave thing to do. Then you have to decide, what am I going to do with this? Does this mean I don't
Mhm.
attend anymore? Does this mean I find my trans friends and I attend with them if that's what they want to do? Would I be better
Mhm.
off saying honest thoughts about maybe the church isn't a safe place for a trans youth right now, and
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't try to sacrifice a trans kid to try to make some kind of cultural intervention so that the church
Mhm.
itself can improve? Yeah, there's a lot of decisions you have to make if you decide it's okay to differ from the church. And, it's funny because as far as doubts are concerned, I just don't harbor doubts about my trans friends anymore. They're
Yeah.
just really not there. I just believe them and I feel like I understand the science pretty well and I feel good about it. So when it comes to doubt, like, yeah, that doubt then gets turned back on what the church is trying to enforce or make me believe or make me participate in. And, that's where disaffection starts to happen. People start to disconnect from the church, or, I think we see this in political parties. We see this in families. We see this in all kinds of different contexts where we start
Right.
to not be in alignment with kind of what we're supposed to be in those groups.
Yeah. I'll add a couple of things and then we can move on. I don't want to belabor this, but here's what I've learned. I think what's underlying so much of this is people don't want to feel uncomfortable. They really shy away from tolerating discomfort, whether that's in speaking up and what that will activate in their nervous system, what that might mean about their sense of belonging or acceptance. And two, acknowledging that our leaders are humans. All humans make mistakes. And I don't even like to use the word mistake much anymore. I like to view it as more, this life is a learning process for all of us. And we learn by doing. That's how I learn. And so sometimes things that we do, choices that we make, words that we say, we realize there's a better way. that we can do better. And like Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And just because we are connecting with that very sacred, that very personal inner connection that we have with God and acknowledging that for ourselves and maybe even sharing it with others doesn't mean that we are by default implying or saying anything negative about those in leadership positions. It means we're being human and we're listening to ourselves. And that's what cultivates that's what cultivates positive, productive, mental, spiritual, emotional health. Yeah, there's something else I wanted to say.
It does. I'll just add to that. That's where it gets hard too to say, I could find a way to make it make sense to me that leaders are flawed and I can still participate in these ways. But also, for me, I want to be really careful that I'm not doing that at the expense of the marginalized, that I'm not just putting them on the shelf and saying, I don't like what's happening, but it's not really directly affecting me. I'm going to put that to the side because there's all these other good things that are happening. And I think some great apologetics for the church are done and some great like faith promoting work is done that doesn't do enough digging in for the marginalized. And that sometimes these efforts at making ourselves feel better about being in the church come at the expense of people who are less privileged or people who could stand to be treated by the church so much better than they are. So yeah, I want people to find healthy ways to rethink their faith. And I don't advise people either stay or leave in the church directly. I'm not like, oh, you should leave the church or you should stay in the church. I want people to do what is healthy for them. And that could change at any point in time. But I do always want to go back to, is what I'm doing contributing to the marginalization of people who have it worse than me? Am I short-circuiting my own qualms about being here, making me feel okay? Because people make mistakes, people hurt. I can accept that prophets hurt people, that church leadership hurts people. But what am I personally going to do about it? And that's going to be an individual decision. I know people that have left the church, people that are still in, people who aren't sure where they're at with regard to it. I have love and respect for people all over the spectrum.
Yes, this is it's a very unique, tricky, difficult space to occupy. But I have found God in these marginal spaces for sure. And I hear you. What you're saying is so true. To be willing to ask yourself, is what I am doing contributing to the marginalization of these folks who are already deeply marginalized?
One other footnote for that too.
Sure.
I also try not to make myself a hero and be like, isn't that great? Or like me being mad at the church about how it treats trans people in the end doesn't actually really help trans people. It doesn't help my queer friends for me to be like, the church is wrong about gay people and screw that. Or to be like, I'm going to stay and make it better. Like neither of those things necessarily helps. Like what else am I doing? Am I voting for people that help further the cause of justice for marginalized people? Am I using my voice to publicly oppose things that hurt trans people? Am I talking to friends and family and sharing my beliefs with them and trying to enlist more people in the service of being on the side of the marginalized? There's a difference between being an ally, which to me seems a little bit more performative and about me, and being an accomplice, which means like, I'm going to get into the trenches with you. I'm going to be with you. And so I've also seen it and been tempted to this myself of like, oh, the church is wrong about XYZ. I'm going to just point that out and be done. And I've done my work. It's like, no, no, there's plenty more to do. Like we don't think you've done enough just by disagreeing.
Yeah, I feel that. So I have really, really appreciated this conversation so very much. So many good points, so much meaningful discourse here. I wanted to, actually, I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
One is, can you share what your Instagram and podcast, like what's behind that? What brought that up for you?
Yeah, thanks. Talks. So the Instagram account's mainly just trying to get people to listen to the podcast. So I love podcasting. And when I left BYU, I wanted to continue podcasting. And so I started a podcast called Fireside with Blair Hodges, which was interviewing authors about a lot of the books that I didn't get to do while I was at BYU. Like sort of we can't do that at BYU then, so that's definitely more religiously directed. But I also have been thinking about being raised in a religion that taught me that there's one true way to be a family. And it's a nuclear family. Mom
Mhm.
nurtures, dad provides, kids obey their parents. And it's this, this is how the world needs to work. And through my graduate studies, it became pretty obvious that that model of the family was very temporary, and it was kind of a European import into America at a very particular time in history, and that families have looked way different than that over the course of human history. There's way more ways to be a family than this nuclear family model.
Yeah.
And we could learn a lot from them. And so I thought, I want to think about all the family proclamations, plural, like all the different kinds of ways to be a family. And that's going to raise questions about gender. What are the proper gender roles? It's going to raise
Mhm.
questions about sexuality. Who are we attracted to? What's right and wrong when it comes to that? So
Mhm.
Family Proclamations is a way to explore all those questions with the best books I could find. We're taught to seek wisdom out of the best books, right? That's a
Mhm.
Mormon scripture in our Doctrine and Covenants. I thought I'm going to find the best books I can about families, about divorce, about foster care, about adoption, about infertility, about postpartum depression, about menstruation, about
Yeah.
masculinity, about everything I can think about being trans, about non-binary folks,
Mhm.
about being asexual. And I'm going to find the best books I can, and I'm going to talk to those authors, hear their stories, hear why they wrote their books, and see what they're all
Mhm.
about. So that's what the show is about, is re-exploring what it means to be a family, what it means to present as a certain gender, and what it means to experience our sexuality. And that's what the show is about. So the Instagram account kind of highlights things from the episodes, but the podcast itself is really where I think where the good stuff is.
Amazing. I will definitely leave that information in the show notes so that folks can find and follow you and listen. So, the last question I like to ask my guests has to do with the title of my podcast. I dropped the A on purpose, trying to move past that negative connotation again. But, Blair, what does it mean to you to live beyond the shadow of doubt?
Mhm. Okay. So I love this reframing. I love how you have,
Thank you.
yeah, you've taken this language. Yeah, I see this happening in the Book of Mormon, where like Nephi's quoting Isaiah, and it's different than what you go to the Bible and you see. He's like riffing on this, right? And I see you doing
Uh-huh.
this. It's a very wonderful scriptural thing to do. So instead of beyond a shadow of a doubt, which is basically saying like I don't have
Right.
any doubts. I'm beyond
Yeah.
the shadow. And the doubt is this shadow that looms over you. It's looming, it's ominous, it's
Yeah.
harmful. And you're saying, no, we're beyond the shadow of doubt. And that doesn't mean doubt's gone at all. It means that we have found that the sun can shine where doubt exists.
That's so
And
cool.
yeah, and so what it
Mm.
made me think of this interview that I did with a terrific writer named Mary Rako. And she wrote a book called This Is Why I Came. And Mary herself went through a deep period of doubt and anger at God. Mary broke up with God, she says.
Mhm,
She
mhm,
literally like drove to a church, got out of her car, went inside. She was Catholic. She went
mhm.
inside and said, God, I'm done. She envisioned a thread that was holding her to God, and she envisioned herself cutting that thread. She was
Wow.
done. And after that, she wrote one of the most remarkably spiritual books I've ever read. It's called This Is Why I Came. And it's about a woman who doubts God, but returns to find God again after 30 years and rewrites the Bible. So the book is all these Bible stories rewritten through the perspective of mostly of women,
Mhm.
and just a terrific book. But in my interview with her, I wanted to read this quote from her because I asked her about a line from the book where that woman who was trying to find God again after cutting herself off, and
Mhm.
Mary is really writing about herself here. This
Okay.
woman says, I want my integrity and my faith both at the same time. And I asked Mary what she meant by that. And she said, everyone wants their integrity and their faith at the same time. A 7-year-old wants that. A 90-year-old wants that. Who doesn't want it? Who wants a fake God? Who wants a God that's too small? Who wants a God who does stuff that we wouldn't even do in our humanity? I mean, we still have mercy after all. We want a God who's at least as good as we are at our best. We want something way beyond our imagining. And if we don't have experience of that, or we don't have teachings that lead us toward that, then it's actually the moral thing to say, this is not a God I accept. And that is a very religious thing to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I love that. Every time I ask that question, I love the responses I get from my guests. I learned something there. Every spin is a little different and it's so cool. Loved this so much. These conversations are so helpful and selfishly healing to
I
me.
think a lot of podcasters podcast for ourselves. Like
I'm
I've
glad to hear you
certainly,
say
yeah.
that. So I just have a few more questions that I'm going to throw out. I throw them out to all my guests. I'm just looking for 1 or 2 word answers is all, just for us to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us your favorite book or the one that you're reading right now.
Oh, well, I don't really have a favorite book. The one I'm,
Okay. I
the one
figured since
I'm,
you
yeah,
podcasted about them.
the one I'm reading about right now is a little awkward because it's about polyamory, and I'm not polyamorous, and I'm not looking to become polyamorous. But in
Mhm.
doing a show about different families and different relationship structures, I
Mhm.
knew that I would eventually have to get to that because some people do practice that, and I had
Yes.
questions about it, and I wondered what it's all about, and I have definitely biases and prejudices about it. And so I'm reading a book that a therapist wrote about being a therapist who's worked with polyamorous people, and it actually has a lot to say about things that touch on all relationships, not just things like jealousy, but things about good communication, keeping agreements, setting
Mhm.
boundaries, being connected to your partner, but also being able to differentiate from your partner. So I'm learning a lot about relationships in general from a book about polyamory, which is something I'm not interested in pursuing. But again, I think that's why I love doing this show is so many different ways of being in a relationship can
Mhm.
teach us all kinds of things.
I was
And
just going to say we can still learn so much from them.
yeah,
Fascinating. Well, tell us, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm sort of in both. It depends on the situation. I used to be very extroverted, and over the past, I don't know, 5 years or so, I've become much more introverted, and I definitely have to recharge my social battery and
Hmm.
start, taking better emotional care of myself. So I'm
Sure.
I'm probably somewhere in between, I would say.
Cool. Are you a night owl or a morning lark?
Both, but this is a product of like ADHD. So
Okay.
like my brain just keeps going and my
Got it.
poor wife wants to go to bed at like 9 or 10. And I'm like, what? Like I could start a project at that time. But then when the sun
Oh
comes
dear.
up, I'm like, let's go. Like I got stuff to do. I do love to sleep in on the weekends and I love an afternoon nap. So don't get me wrong. Like I love my sleep, but
You have them both sprinkled in there for sure.
yeah, it's probably not the most healthy way to live, but
Tell us your favorite artist.
boy, I don't think I have a favorite artist. Yeah,
Kind
I
of
don't really have one.
depends on the situation.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, I have
a
a friend.
valid answer.
I love Brian Krasnick's art. He's a friend though, so it's sort of like, I could
Got
say like,
it.
oh, but his art has always really appealed to me. I love his style and I like the stories that he's telling. And so yeah, I would say he's up
That's
there. It's sort
great.
of funny because like he's a Mormon artist who doesn't necessarily do Mormon art, definitely not for his whole
Hmm.
portfolio or anything, but it's like, Blair, you gotta like expand your horizons here, buddy. Like, but no, Brian's art's terrific.
Awesome. Do you have a celebrity crush?
Celebrity crush. It's funny. We just finished the latest season of The Bear,
Hmm.
which is a terrific show about a restaurant in Chicago. And
Hmm.
the lead character, his name's Carmy. I think he's a pretty handsome dude. I don't really consider myself like I don't consider myself bi. I consider myself pretty hetero, but like I think he's just like a handsome guy. Like
That's
so
great.
I feel like and it's funny because like I'd want to hang out with him, the character, and like see what's up. But my wife is like, no way. Like he's so toxic and like I'm like, oh, but he's damaged and he's got baggage. And I so like I want to like give this guy a
That's
hug. And
funny.
she's like, I'm scared of him. So we have different opinions on him, but
That's
like
hilarious.
he's kind of been my little crush, I would say, lately.
Love it. Do you do
Oh,
still
and
or
by the way,
car?
his blue eyes are like really just beautiful. So,
Do you do still or carbonated water? Or are you a diet soda fan?
okay, so I converted to a seltzer water because my
Hmm.
wife would drink it a lot, and at night we'd be like sitting on the couch, and she'd be sitting there with the seltzer water, and I don't want to get all the way up and go over to the sink and like get water, so I would just take a sip of hers, and I was like, this stuff is so gross. But
It's
over
an
the
acquired
course of
taste.
like
Uh-huh.
6 months, yeah, it came to
It's
be like I
tasty.
realized I would be drinking more and more of it. And she's like, hey, like be careful there. And then I was like, oh, I guess I could just get my own can now. So I
That's
love that stuff.
funny.
I probably drink a seltzer water at least one every night.
Yeah, they're a nice treat,
Yeah.
I think. And then finally, the furthest place that you have traveled.
Russia is the furthest place I've traveled.
Nice.
And it's the only place I've been to outside of the United States.
Hmm.
And my partner served her mission there. and
Okay.
also got a graduate degree in Russian and taught Russian at the U for a number of years. And so we
Very
went on our
nice.
big Russia trip right before we had kids. It was absolutely
What part?
outstanding. We went to Moscow and St. Petersburg and then
Mhm.
smaller places like Pskov,
Uh-huh.
and some little places that she served. And
That's
we
great.
also went to Ukraine, which was way awesome and much more friendly and kind of at home in Ukraine. And, I don't know if I'm ever going to get back there. It's a really
Yeah. Right.
geopolitically tragic right now. Russia's doing terrible things in Ukraine, and it's not a safe place,
Yeah.
especially for queer folks and marginalized folks. So I don't know that I'll ever get back there, but it really was a terrific trip, and I'm glad that I got the chance to do it. I
Yes.
wouldn't have done it if it weren't for my wife, who's fluent and could
Yeah.
be my guide. That's not a place that tourists go to vacation.
Yeah. My husband and I got the opportunity to visit Moscow and St. Petersburg. And that's because I had an uncle at the embassy. You
Oh
have to
yeah,
kind of
cool.
go under
Yeah.
different special circumstances. Yeah. That was
Yeah.
years and years ago. Well, fantastic, Blair. Such a great conversation. I will leave the links to Family Procs and Firesides in the show notes for guests to connect with you and reach out if they have any questions.
Great.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. This has been fun.
So good to have you. Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more, or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.